Conservation efforts. Strategies aimed to allocate resources effectively, about how to analyze the most biodiverse areas in the United States, as well as look at the current stage of conservation effort. As a part of researching for this project, we looked at the correlation between modern conservation efforts and where the most biodiverse ecosystems in the United States are positioned. This has significant importance because it allows us to evaluate if our efforts are being used effectively with the ways conservationists decide to spend, how much, and where. According to a journal article by Clinton Jenkins and other contributors in the National Academy of Sciences, published in March of 2015, many of the most biodiverse ecosystems and species in the United States may not be protected adequately. These researchers aim to look at areas that are and are not currently protected and ranked the largest of these areas that are not, leading 9 hotspots. According to Jenkins' map, the most biodiverse and important hotspots cover a majority of the southeast and south central U.S., as well as many parts of California and north of. In response, Christopher Brown and contributors assessed Jenkins' research and formulated a response. Brown argued that Jenkins did not evaluate the impacts of economic, social, and political constraints that can make the conservation process perform difficult. Furthermore, Brown stated that conservation should prioritize actions, not species, as well as Jenkins' hotspots were only aimed at richly diverse hotspots and not at all species. This could be problematic, especially when a simplistic analysis could misinform investments, obviously not the intent of both authors. Clinton Jenkins responds back to Brown with further insight of his research. Jenkins points out 3 major ideas. First, that many pre-existing conservation sites were made possible because they were cheap, beautiful, or expedient to obtain. Second, Jenkins notes that the process for conservation is based on species who need protection the most, as conserving species is a main fundamental to the field of conservation. And finally, Jenkins writes that the risk of extinction outweighs convenience and price. Jenkins contends that ultimately conservation of a species is a far larger concept than a temporary price or convenience, and should be held as such. Written years earlier, authors Peter Kariva and Michel Marvier write in The American Scientist that labeling diverse ecosystems hotspots or areas where conservation efforts are intended to go may actually do the opposite of the original intentions of helping these regions. They argue that although these hotspots may bring the right attention and effort, they could also take away efforts from the other ecologically diverse spots, leaving them out in the cold. Kariva also hints back to Brown's point of relying back on the past of successful conservation efforts because they have worked. Otherwise, it may be an uphill battle that may not effectively distribute conservation efforts. Although this journal was written years before, and factors like technology and time may have changed, I agree partly with Kariva and Marvier that labeling an area a hotspot should not totally change an area's priority of conservation, but should give a general idea. Here's the GIS model that we used when producing our very own set of hotspots around the United States and tied this into Jenkins' model of biodiversity hotspots. Along with this, we added in data of slope and hillshade to create our very own priority hotspot. Here's our first map, which is fairly simple. It shows areas around the United States which have slope, in other words, areas with elevation. This can give us a general understanding of areas where human interaction may be hardest. Areas in yellow are less steep, and areas with red are steepest. Listed next is Jenkins' slide showing priority hotspots for biodiversity in the United States, the same map from slides earlier. As you can see, much of the most diverse areas in the map are near the coast, with red being the highest priority and blue being the moderate to lower. Finally, here's our own priority hotspots throughout the United States. Areas in darker red are higher intensity, and areas that are lighter and pinkish showcase areas that are important but less biodiverse. There are some similarities between Jenkins' map and our own, with less action surrounding the southeast as it is dispersed out more. We can also observe spots in upper state New York and parts of Wisconsin and Minnesota. The west coast shows minor differences. This information will be useful to conservation groups as well as the general public concerned with conservation, as well as how funds should be allocated. These very complex sites hold importance to many functions to the United States, and without proper guidelines, funding could be spent inefficiently.